Hi, I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining me for another exciting episode of From the Corner Office. Our voting rights continue to be under attack. In fact, National Urban League President and CEO Mark Morial aptly described where we stand. The surge of restrictive voting laws that began after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act with its 2013 decision in Shelby County versus Holder became a tsunami in the backlash to the historic Black voter turnout in 2020. The first devastating wave crashed down on Black voters in Georgia last month when Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed legislation with a range of voting limitations, from requiring photo ID for absentee ballots to barring food and water given to voters in line at the polls. This new law in Georgia will effectively block thousands from exercising their most fundamental right as Americans. But the potential damage from this political storm doesn't stop there. Roughly 360 new laws proposed in 47 states would create potential barriers for millions of Black voters. This legislative action is a blatant attempt to turn back the clock to a draconian Jim Crow era that denies Black Americans full, unfettered participation in the electoral process. However, a group of Black corporate and business leaders, including Ken Frazier, Clarence Otis, Bill Lewis, and my guest today, decided to take a stand to uphold rights that took centuries of protest and bloodshed to realize. On March 31st, they ran a full-page advertisement in the New York Times, headlined, "Memo to Corporate America, the fierce urgency of now," signed by 72 of the nation's most prominent Black C-suite executives, including myself. The ad demanded that the nation's corporate leadership unequivocally join the battle against voter suppression. That message has grown into a movement, culminating with the recent release of a second spread ad in the New York Times and Washington Post, in which the number of signatories swelled to 700, including hundreds of the nation's largest corporations. Today, my guests are two of the leaders of this unprecedented campaign, global business icons Ken Chenault and Charles Phillips. Ken represents one of this era's most dynamic business leaders, having served as chairman and CEO of American Express. During his 17-year tenure as its chief executive, he led the financial giant's innovation, transformation, and growth. Today, he continues to innovate as chairman and managing director of the venture capital firm General Catalyst and co-founder of 110, a coalition of leading executives coming together to employ 1 million Black Americans over the next decade. Charles is the powerhouse chairman of Infor, the world's third largest business software applications company with 17,000 employees and 90,000 customers in 190 countries. He previously served as a CEO for 9 years of robust growth. Prior to Infor, he was president of Oracle Corp. During his 8-year tenure, the company tripled its size and market cap, as well as successfully acquired more than 70 companies. Before Oracle, Charles was a managing director at Morgan Stanley in the technology group. He currently serves as co-chair of the Black Economic Alliance, a consortium of business leaders committed to economic advancement within the Black community. BEA has been one of the driving forces of the Voting Rights Initiative. Today, Ken and Charles will discuss the impetus and impact of the corporate call to action and the required next steps to protect and preserve our franchise. Ken, Charles, thank you for joining me. This has been a very, very important 2 weeks that we've gone through, and would love, Ken, if you could just start off by telling us, how did this all come together so quickly in gathering this group of signatories and placing the ad in the New York Times?
So I think, Butch, what was very important here is that we recognized that the law that was passed in Georgia was not just an issue of Georgia, but was going to be a threat in 46 states. And we thought, as Black Americans, we needed to do something that had never been done before. And that is to have Blacks in the corporate sector stand up and speak out. And I think, Butch, as you know, the reality is that the vote for Black Americans was not something that was a birthright. Many people died for the right to vote.
Sure.
And so Charles, Bill Lewis, Ken Frazier, Clarence Otis said we need to do something. And the idea we had was, let's make a statement. And what we want is for corporate America to take a position on a basic fundamental right, which strikes at the heart of democracy, and that's the right to vote.
Charles, Ken pointed out and said and talked about the fact that this is beyond Georgia. This is multiple states. And many of those states are Democratic states. And so can you explain a little bit about, because it's mystifying to so many people, how is it possible? How did this happen so quickly that right after the 2020 election, which of course is time to what happened with Georgia and ultimately what happened with the senators, so many states were able to get this pulled together so quickly? And it's the number of states and the number of laws. It's so mystifying. But can you give some insight as to how that could have even potentially happened in a country that is both Democrat and Republican, in states that are leading or being led by Democratic senators and Democratic governors as well?
And thanks, Butch. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me on.
Right.
I don't want to miss the fact that they all stepped up, not sure that everybody would follow them when that happened. So we called them all, and literally within 36 hours, pretty much all of our friends agreed to do it, all the people we jointly know. And not all of them had control. Not all of them were CEOs. So there were some personal exposure potentially involved here. And fortunately, the rest of the corporate world rallied around it. But so I want to just thank all of them for stepping up. I think this change and how rapidly this has happened is simply about one thing. People who are used to having control see the demographics changing. They didn't expect Trump to lose, or at least we're hoping he wasn't. And if you're losing, they decide to change the rules. It's like, I don't like this game, I'm losing, and I'm going to step out. So there are Republicans in every state. So in some of these Democratic states, doesn't mean they're going to pass the law, but certainly there's a Republican pocket in every state that's going to fight as hard as they can to change the rules and use some basis and bend the laws. And it's so pervasive, and they're so well-financed and animated that that's why we concluded we have to do something, because we don't know how this could go. They may get some traction in more states than we think. And you have to question the motivation, and that's the motivation. Otherwise, none of these people were talking about this 10 years ago. Everything worked fine. We were comfortable with our elections 10, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. And now all of a sudden we have this existential crisis. We need to change laws in 43 states or something. And so that's the only logical explanation, is that they feel like I'm losing power and I'm not going to put up with it.
Yeah, I think, Butch, one of the things that's very important is that we emphasized that our stand was nonpartisan. So what we're not doing is prescribing how people vote. But to Charles's point, the intention we all need to understand. But what we also want to emphasize is this is nonpartisan.
Which is interesting, the first ad garnered a lot of attention. The second ad, and a response. I'm going to come back to that response from corporate America. The second ad that you referred to, referenced Charles, had the support now of some 700 additional people, right? Corporations, individuals, what have you. But I'd love to be able to try to unpack a little bit what was the response from corporate America from the first ad that ran. And there was Coca-Cola and Delta in particular who, kind of had a knee-jerk response, then they backed it up again. But what is the responsibility that you all feel, and you guys have both spent an enormous time in corporate America, obviously. What's the responsibility of corporate America when something is so unjust? This is not partisan, it's just unjust to try to find a way to keep people out from voting. What is the response, or what is the responsibility, I should say, for corporate America to step in from your point of view?
I think what's very important here, Butch, and you said it all, what we're focused on is what is just in America. And I frankly think that corporations have to take a position. And the point I have made in talking to the press is, what if corporate America during Reconstruction had said, we think we got to commit to rights for Black people in the United States? We'd be in a very different country. What if corporations had come out after Brown v. Board of Education and said, we're not only going to integrate our schools, we're going to integrate our companies. So when someone says to me that corporations should not be involved in our society, I totally reject that notion.
Charles?
Well, companies have gotten involved in aspects of politics for a long, long time when it benefits them. So this is not a new concept. There's a whole giant lobbying industry for a reason that's paid by corporations. So the idea that they never touched anything around this topic or any political topic was one of the arguments. That's just simply not true. But I do think they don't have much choice anymore. The employees, the customers are demanding it. And I think it's because a lot of those employees have lost faith in traditional institutions, whether it's government. They're probably not as religious as they once were. They're not at their academic institutions anymore. They're not around their families. So what they see every day and what they rely on and what they respect is their company. And it means a lot to them that they have a company with purpose, a company with values and ethics. And you can gain or lose good employees by not responding to that. So it's different than it was 20 years ago, just because all these changes, the country's gotten so partisan and the institutions have failed us so much, I guess, that people are looking to companies now. And so that's a responsibility they have, whether they like it or not. That's kind of how the country has evolved.
Yeah, it's not to be partisan, but Mitch McConnell coming out and saying, hey, business people, stay in your lane, right? Don't get involved in politics. And my response would be, okay, Mitch McConnell and Republicans, don't accept contributions from corporate America then. I mean, or if you can't have it both ways. You can't tell corporate America, stay out of the business of politics, and at the same time, you're accepting millions and millions and millions of dollars of gifts from the very people you say they want to stay out of it.
Yeah.
Question would be, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think, Butch, to your point, the reality is the overwhelming support that the statement received from corporate America came after Senator McConnell's statement. So I think corporate America decided that they were going to stand up on this.
All right, they spoke loudly. How can Black Americans who are disproportionately impacted by this hold corporate America accountable to make sure that these types of issues, like what happened in Georgia, is addressed and is taken seriously, right? Because I think, Charles, you referenced it before, people have lost faith in their institutions, but the corporation of which they spend so much time and have so much invested in, they're looking for those companies to say, okay, we're here to support you, right? But if in fact they don't, I guess the question is, what can we do? What can Black Americans do to hold corporate America accountable to live their pledge? I'm going to come back to that in a moment. but to live this pledge of saying we're going to do the right thing?
I don't think it's only corporate America. It's going to take a lot of leaders in different segments to make some progress here. Sure, there are a lot of activists, legal organizations like LDF, get out the vote people who, in response to this, will work even harder to make sure people have the IDs to vote. So I think everybody's going to play their role, and corporations can certainly highlight and bring this to everyone's attention. And certainly, I think, that's what happened the last couple of weeks, but it's going to take other actors getting involved with special skill sets, and it goes beyond what a company can do. So hopefully we'll point the direction to a few organizations who can help, and that's what we're trying to figure out right now, how to communicate some of that.
Yeah, what I would also say, Butch, in a very basic way, is get out to vote. Because at the end of the day, if we do not exercise this right, we know what's going to happen. So clearly we need to increase the percentage of Black Americans that vote at the local level, the state level, and the national level. What I would also say to one of Charles' earlier points is Black employees at companies need to be clear about what the issues are that are important to them. And the customers of these companies need to express their point of view just as they would if they were having a customer service issue with that company.
Right. Both of you have started and been involved in some additional initiatives that coincide with what we're facing now, both with the voter suppression. Charles with the Black Economic Alliance and Ken with the 110 initiative. If you could both take a couple of minutes and just talk a little bit about the Black Economic Alliance and also 110 initiative, so we can share with the audience, what additional things are taking place in addition to what we're dealing with the voter suppression.
And you want to go on 110 first?
Okay. So let me say, Butch, first of all, Charles was a founding member of 110 and also a founding member with BEA. So I just want to give a shout out to Charles for his leadership and his involvement. Right after the George Floyd murder, Ken Frazier, Charles, myself, Kevin Shearer, we got together and we said, what are some things that we could do that could make a tangible difference? And we decided one of the concrete things we could do was really to increase employment opportunities and also career mobility opportunities for Black Americans. So what we said was we want to create an organization that is solely dedicated to Black Americans. And so that was a very important step. And we said we want to get commitment from companies, but not just giving a grant, but in fact to make a 10-year annual financial commitment that was sizable enough that would really show a commitment. And secondly, we wanted a 10-year commitment to create jobs. And one of the things that we found was there is a substantial majority of jobs that require a college degree, and that college degree has nothing to do with the execution of the job. And so skills and capabilities that we could train people. Now, let me be clear. We want as many people to have the opportunity to go to college. But what we also don't want to have, and this is what is meant by structural racism, that they're qualified people and some of the entry-level requirements are not correlated to the actual performance of the job. So that is what 110 is about. And we now have over 46 of the largest companies in the United States committed to this. And I think we are making substantial progress. We're going to be persistent. We've hired a terrific CEO. His name is Maurice Jones. And we are going to make a difference. And I would hope that while the target is 1 million jobs in 10 years, that we'll have a multiple of jobs that we will have created. Charles.
I think it's a big opportunity. And as Ken described, a lot of these jobs, they're over-credentialized. And so most Black people do not have a college degree. So you're leaving a lot of people out of work when you do that. The problem is to get the training that they need, it's a series of small nonprofits that are spread around the country by city, by industry, by job role. And it's hard for large companies to deal with that. It's too much friction. They don't know where to find all these, there's thousands of them. And so part of what 110 is going to do is create the network and the authentication engine to find the ones that work by job role and by city. And the companies will provide their hiring needs and we'll match it to the providers who can do the training and be the go-between. And so that national network that we're building now, I think, is the key. And it's focused on Black people, which is unlike most of these things that get started, and it's national. So we are pretty excited about it. We do have a great CEO, Maurice Jones, who came from LISC. He's served in the Obama administration as well. He's done a lot of nonprofit things that are notable, and he's a great leader. We're up and running.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about the Black Economic Alliance too, Charles, if you could.
Yeah, so the Black Economic Alliance was started around 2016. And the idea there was, can you get business people, Black business people, to use the skills that they've learned in business to help grow the Black economy? And the tagline is work, wages, and wealth. And we found out that a lot of politicians, for instance, just don't have good data, good ideas on how to help the Black community, lack of focus. They introduce legislation all the time that they don't consider the impact on Black people. And so once we got all of this cohort of people together and they realized there's experts in different industries, we have a lot of resources here, they never had an organized, kind of way to get to that cohort. And that's what this is. So there's a C3 that does policy research. There's a C4 that does voter education and get out the vote. And then we also have a PAC to support politicians who support the policies that we put out in the C3. So it's multifaceted, but we needed somewhere where someone was tracking kind of Black America's balance sheet and represent that. So we like to say we're Black America's auditor, whereas LDF is a Black America's lawyer. So that's kind of the role we played, and people call us for those sorts of topics. So we have executive director, a whole team that's doing that now.
That's outstanding. Ken, you referenced before, and it's been a trigger point that we've seen over the past year, but following the aftermath of, people call it, quote, the George Floyd incident, corporate America feels comfortable saying, rather than calling it what it is, which is that man was murdered. But I do think that there was a difference this past year in the reaction of America, not just corporate America, but the reaction of America to what they saw. There was two pandemics going on, one that's been going on much longer time. The first pandemic was, quote, the coronavirus, but ultimately people will get past that. But the pandemic of racism has been going on for 400 years, right? And it's a challenge that no matter how many times it was brought up, it was always kind of kicked to the curb. And then you heard people say, well, we're going to focus our diversity efforts. And whenever they use the word diversity, I always keep coming back to, that's a diversion away from Black, because diversity can mean any number of about 20 different things. And you can make your numbers look good and move them around, play three-card Monte with that all day long to make sure that it looks right, but it doesn't deal with Black. So now what we've seen is these corporations have come out, a lot of corporations, and made these significant economic pledges to fight systemic racism, social justice, to want to reinvest, quote, in Black America. And 1 year later, or almost a year later, many of these pledges have not come to fruition. I think people made pledges, they were knee-jerk responses to things, and then they didn't have a plan to how to execute it or think about it, but it doesn't mean anything. It said we've pledged $500 million to something or $1 billion to X unless there's a plan. So how do we take and make it so to have corporate America, those who've made these pledges, live the pledge, to help them to execute? Maybe they need to be working with organizations like 110 and like the Black Economic Alliance, but I don't see how they're going to do it because, you know, I spend half my day literally listening and talking to folks in corporate boardrooms. They tell me what they're going to do, and I say, okay, just tell me how you're going to do it.
Right.
You know, how do you go from spending $1 million to spending $500 million if you don't have a plan, you don't have an infrastructure to execute? So would love for you guys to touch on, you know, you've all seen it and heard it, and perhaps, you know, many of us sit on boards and you listen to boards make these announcements, you go, Jesus, they're just saying this to say it. Because, you know, we're all sitting there shocked, saying, are they going to spend, if they spend as much money as they say they're going to spend, Black America would never have a problem.
Right. So I think, Butch, the first point I would make is the comparison, and it was of in the 60s, people seeing on television dogs being sicked on Black demonstrators and getting the fire hoses out. And that raised the awareness of, boy, this is a real serious problem here. But in some cases, because it was on TV, people couldn't talk it away. Because that always happens with us, it's talked away. The reality is, with particularly the George Floyd murder, people couldn't talk it away. So I think we could be, and I don't want to say at all, I'm with you, I'm not certain. We could be at an inflection point where there's the recognition that something has to happen, but also, to your point, people have not only made statements, some people have said, well, I'm putting out X amount of dollars to bring about a change. Now, the reality is, and that's one of the reasons why 110, we said, don't talk to us about making a one-year contribution. You got to be persistent at this. You got to make a 10-year commitment. And the reality is that part of what we have to do, to your point, and I think those of us in the business community and those of us who are in positions of power, senior positions in companies or on the board of directors, need to say, look, just like any investment you're making, take us through the game plan. Take us through how you're spending the money year 1, year 2, year 3. So I think that what is important is those of us who are in positions of power or influence need to say, show me. Help me understand the numbers and help me understand what the return is. It's not enough to say, I'm going to put in $2 billion, but I can't tell you where it's going. I just want to keep that confidential. No, what we want is full transparency and disclosure.
Charles?
I think, but your concern over what's being called virtue signaling is a good one, that people put out press releases just so they can say they're covered. But that's partly how 110 got started, because we were invited, I think, to speak. I think it was a business council rather, right while George Floyd was going on. Everybody wanted to discuss this topic, and both cans, to their credit, said we shouldn't just get on there and talk. Let's give them something to do within their purview. This is something they can execute on, is create jobs. They know how to do that. They really can't do much about police reform and a lot of other things we're worried about, but this they can do. So giving them something tangible and a time frame and a number on it that's how business people think. And so that's kind of was the birth of kind of 110 when we hatched it up that one night. Having said that, I don't know if this moment lasts or not. I'm concerned about it, but that's one of the reasons we had to move quickly while there was interest. We probably could not have done 110 2 or 3 years ago. So let's lock it in now. I was out at the George Floyd trial week before last. I went out with Al Sharpton, Ray McGuire, and Governor Patterson, and we met with the family, did a public prayer. And one of the things that concerned me when I came away is the chatter about how the trial was being conducted, is it the instructions to the jury. So when you add all that up, you're concerned about it could go either way. We never can be certain. That was what I walked away with, it a little uncertain as well. So I'm hoping for the best, obviously, and we'll just have to see what happens. But you never say it can't happen based on history.
No. You know, I had a, would love to get your guys' point of view on this, because both of you sat on numerous corporate boards and the like, and I had done it from the corner office about 6 months ago, right after the George Floyd thing. And this white CEO, I'll keep his name out of it for the time being, said to me, he said, well, you know, I want to do more. He goes, and then he looked at me and he said, what is it that Black people want? And it shook me for a minute. I said, well, the question seemed almost inappropriate, but he didn't mean it like you're a gnat or a fly, I want to get you off my shoulder. He was really trying to understand, like, just tell me what Black people want. And it seems sophomoric almost in the way he asked it, but at the same time, it really gave me an insight to think, perhaps these folks really don't understand that we want the same things you want. So I said to him, I said, you know, this is really not complicated. Here's what we want. We want jobs, promotions, investment in our companies, investment in our communities. I said, in fact, promotions for no reason at all, because a lot of you guys get promoted for no reason, right? I said, we want all the same. We want education for our children. We want housing. We want the same exact things. Why is that so hard? And I guess I come back to you all on it and say, what is it that gets discussed or doesn't get discussed in boardrooms? Because in other words, and Ken, you know this, and Charles, both of you guys know this, if your sales were down by a third, okay, in a particular quarter, you'd find a way strategically to fix that problem, right? I mean, you bring the best minds in, you would figure this out. If you need to bring outside consultants, you would fix the problem, but it would not go 2 and 3 quarters, because you could never go back to stockholders and say, oh, we were down for 3 straight quarters, but give me a chance, I'm okay. This is the same type, I look at this like this is the same problem. Why can't we come up with a solution? Why is it so challenging? I even find that people don't even want to use the word Black inside corporate America. They don't, they would want to use any other word other than Black, and diverse is what their particular, the word they would like to use. But why is it such a challenge to just get to a solution that seemingly they could solve almost anything else as a business problem, but somehow or another, equity for Black people becomes something that is unsolvable?
I think part of the problem, Butch, and I think you've stated it very well, is people need to feel an accountability. And if you operate, frankly, in my view, in the old paradigm that says, I'm going to run my company, I'm going to do the best I can in the marketplace, but I'm going to divorce myself from society, that doesn't work, because corporations exist because society allows us to exist. And corporations have to really make a difference. Now, there's one thing that I will say that's different from the 60s, is we're in the room. We're in the room where it happens. Not enough of us are in the room, but more than, frankly, some white people think, we are in the room. And so what was very important about the statement that corporate America made is that we were not just saying to corporate America, we need you to do something. We were saying, we're in the room with you. And so when they were talking about what they needed to do and talking to their boards, there were Black people in the room. There were executives in the room. We're not in enough rooms. I want to be very, very clear, but we are in enough rooms that we need to start exercising and build on what we've done over the last 2 or 3 weeks to use our influence so that the rooms are populated with Black people. And what I've said to people, they said, well, if I do this with Black people, what does that mean for my overall commitment to diversity? I've said, you got to do both. This is not one against the other, but at the end of the day, like any other business problem, you got to focus. And you've got to be able to parallel process. And that's what people in business have to do every day. So to me, it's about accountability.
You know, your statement about the reluctance to use the word Black is so true. And for a while, that aggregation under diversity really hurt us, because while their overall numbers look good and they could brag about that externally, the Black number within that was going down. So one of the things we've been focused on is disaggregating that number, and let's see what the real data is. And even with BA, I've had people tell me, even politicians, that if it was just the economic alliance, it'd be easier. But when you say Black economic alliance, now I got problems. I got to deal with it, and it just the yellow coverage. So people got to get over that word Black and accept that, and like any other institution. And so we're not letting them off the hook. Even with 110, there was some pressure to try to let's make it a multicultural, and it's hired a lot of people of color, all sorts of other names. We didn't know this is for Black people. And so what about everybody else? I go, well, when you go to a conference of doctors on heart disease, no one says, hey, we can't talk about heart disease because people got cancer. You talk about the thing that you're solving, that right now we're solving this. You can do other things for other groups of people. We're not saying don't do that. We're just saying this is a severe problem that needs focus. And so we just got to keep that same chant going and convince people that it's okay to say Black and focus on this problem.
Both of you referenced this, and we measure this, and unfortunately, I will say to you, there are, both of you have served as CEOs in corporate in publicly traded companies, but there are now less Black CEOs than there were 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, of publicly traded companies. And as people, Ken, you two guys, have been in positions for long periods of time. And when I say Ken, I'm talking about Ken Frazier with Merck. The problem is that I don't see my father used to say, we don't have enough Buffalo soldiers. And what he meant was those guys back in the 50s and 60s who were prepared to walk in harm's way to make sure that the door was open for Black folks, and that the next group was going to come through, that someone was looking out for them. And so when you go into the halls of what's happening in corporate America, you don't see that, right? You don't see the pipeline. In order to have a pipeline, you got to have a pipe, right? There's not even a pipe for people to get into to be a part of the pipeline. And it's disaggregated, right? And it's looked at, well, that's, we're doing well, and they keep wanting to bring up diversity numbers. So I say that when I'm talking to folks in corporate America, I want to know about the people that look just like me, right? I don't want to know about left-handed Koreans. I don't want to know about those in the military. I don't want to know about white women. Not that you shouldn't do things with all the other respective groups, but why can't we focus strictly on what's happening with Black? And it is a challenge. While I do agree, Ken, that we have more people that are, quote, in the room, we don't have enough people who are speaking up that are sitting in that room. Right? There are people who are sitting in the rooms who are afraid. They're protective of their jobs and not prepared to walk in harm's way. And the aftermath of that, or the outcome of that, is where we stand now, right? Because you don't have those numbers. How is it possible within the S&P 500 that we still today, two startling facts, on the S&P 500 companies, only 300 of those 500 companies have an African American sitting on the board today in 2021. Two, in the same S&P 500, you have less than a half dozen CEOs that happen to be Black. So it's a challenge, and we'd love to have your guys' point of view on it and how it best can be solved. But if we're not prepared to walk in harm's way, we have a responsibility. Black folks have a responsibility to make sure to clear it out. I saw, and I was extraordinarily proud, Ken, when I got my 10K report or what have you with American Express, and I see that there's 5 people Black sitting on a board of 11 board members. That's extraordinary. I can't think of another corporation that has 5 Black people sitting on the board with a lead director who's Black.
Right. So here's what's very important, Butch, is I agree with you 1,000% that we need more people in the room, and Blacks in a position of power and influence need to speak out. But what I would also say is that white people in power and influence need to speak out and act. And I think what's very important is my successor at American Express, Steve Squeri, who's a white man, right? But
Right.
Steve and I talked in depth about his commitment to diversity. Everyone that I interviewed for a senior position, I made sure they understood the importance of diversity and they understood the importance of Blacks moving forward. And so Steve built on what I put in place. And that's important because, to your point, we're not in 200 companies. So we need to call that out, as you did, but we also need to say, don't just lean on the Black folk. What are you doing to bring about change? And so what I can say very clearly is Steve Squeri helped bring about change, and he has a commitment. But we got to hold our folks accountable. We got to hold white folks accountable for really bringing about change also.
Well, Ken was a pioneer in this area, and he blazed the trail for all of us. That's why I'm on the board of American Express, because of Ken, because he recommended that I do it. So when Ken calls you and recommends it, that's what you do, right? So I'm trying to hopefully continue that tradition that he started.
No doubt. Well, listen, I want to be respectful of both of you gentlemen's time. I truly appreciate you coming on and talking about a number of different issues, but at the heart of it is the voter suppression. Black people need to get out and vote. Black people need to take the vaccine too, by the way. We need to be pushing that out and making sure that Black folks are doing that and taking the vaccine. And hopefully we will see a verdict in this trial that is just, and we can begin to solve. And you know, I'll take it on what you said, Ken, in regards to this is a joint responsibility. It's not just Black people alone cannot solve racism.
Right.
We need our white brothers and sisters to be playing a role with us to help solve racism, because we cannot do it alone.
Right. And I would just say, Butch, I just want to thank the Black Enterprise family, because when I was starting out, when Charles was starting out, you gave us positioning in the corporate community. And so what you have done to bring about real change and the persistence of your father, the persistence of you have really made sure that all the forces and those people in power understand that they've got to acknowledge and deal with and advance Black people in America, and particularly in business.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. Charles, thank you as well. Gentlemen, enjoyed this conversation. Keep the fight going, and we will be there 100% to support you and to cover it all the way. So thanks again for participating in the From the Corner office.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bush. Appreciate it.